let's go ahead and take a look at those answers from yesterday. You only had to upload 3 and 4 onto Google Classroom, but we also want to look at 1 and 2 because we want to remember that these cycle back around. So we are looking at day 2, part 2, as you know, because you've found us here. So let's look at question number 1. I got to kind of flip, so let me move my Teen Talk a little closer. That might help me stay in frame. Which of the following is a problem in Mississippi during the time this story takes place? We have famine, drought, prejudice, or war. The answer that makes the most sense to me is prejudice, because that is the answer that I would be able to pull out enough evidence to support. So I could support it by thinking about the berry burning, how some white people had set the black people on fire. I could also support it by thinking back about the textbooks and how they only gave the textbooks to the black school when they were too wore out for the white school to use anymore. So those are acts of prejudice. As well as the bus trying to splash the kids with dirt and things like that. That's also an act of prejudice. So on number 2, it says, in 1 or 2 sentences, summarize the issue Cassie and her brothers have with their school books. So, you know, remember with a summary, you do not necessarily have to have textual evidence. So the problem that the kids have with those textbooks is that on 1, they are visibly used, not gently used. They are kind of wore out. And the biggest problem that they have is on that inside cover where it calls them nigras, and they find that very offensive. And so that is the biggest reason that they don't want the books. Now, 3 and 4 are the questions that you had to put up onto Google Classroom. So I want to kind of find my book here so we can easily get to the evidence that goes with these questions. Number 3, I wanted you to explain how the author shows that Cassie is protective of her brothers. On 24 through 26, Cassie is really showing that she's protective, and that is going with our end in mind, identifying aspect of the character. And so they've given us the aspect that she's protective. So what they're really wanting us to do is tell me, what does she do? Okay, we know the aspect has been identified. She's protective. What did she do that shows us that quality? Well, the first thing she did was on 24 is that she's trying to figure out real quick why in the world he's acting like he's acting. So if we flip to 24, the very last paragraph, it says, I turned to the inside cover of my own book and saw immediately what had made little man so furious. So I could say, a restate, the author shows that Cassie is protective by, on 24, she tries to figure out why is he acting the way he is. And it says, I turned to the inside cover of my book and saw immediately what had made little man so furious. And also on 26, she says, Miss Crocker, don't please. I know why he done it. And the teacher says, do you want a piece of this switch, Cassie? No, I said hastily. I just wanted to tell you how come little man done what he done. And so she's showing us that she's protective because she's wanting to explain to Miss Crocker what exactly had taken place. And, you know, Miss Crocker is not real receptive of that, is she? And in fact, Cassie even voluntarily takes a whipping herself. So they gave us the aspect of Cassie. okay? Then we had to identify the action that she did to support it. Do you see that? All right, last one. Does Cassie trust her mother? And how can you tell? So the very last thing I read was page 31, and I kind of wanted to write that down here so I would know what page number I'm going to. And I guess on 29, 30, and 31, Cassie is trying to get to her mom to tell her what has gone on that day at school, because she's learned from experience. She said it's better just to tell. So she gets to her mom's building and she sees her teacher going in, and she's like, oh, crud, didn't get it there in time. And she kind of eavesdrops and she hears the conversation between her mom and her teacher. And when it's all said and done, on the bottom of 31 is where I get my answer for this. So I would say that yes, Cassie trusts her mother. I can tell this by on page 31. It says, I would wait until the evening to talk to her. There was no rush now. She understood. And then I could say also, I could talk about how Mama was covering up that list on the front of all the books that had the white kids and white all the way down and into the Negro part. So she knew that Mama understood because Mama found it offensive as well. And so that's how I knew she could trust Mama. She can trust Mama to understand. And that's really important to her. So I'm going to give you a moment to let you make changes or add things that you need to add. All right, so we've made it to chapter 2, page 32. It's a lot of reading in this book, and I hate that I'm the only one doing the reading. I would love to be able to say, okay, I need you to read silently, but we got to remember through making accommodations for all of our classmates, it just requires me doing all the reading at this point. So just for those of you who love to read on your own, I'm going to read from pages 32 to 38 today. And then we're going to talk about a character trait, okay? So if you want to turn me off and you read silently, I would ask that you fast forward it probably to the last 5 minutes of this video to where we talk about that character trait aspect, okay? Cassie, you better watch yourself, girl, Big Ma cautioned, putting one rough, large hand against my back to make sure I didn't fall. Well, I looked down at my grandmother. From midway up one of the wooden poles Papa had set out to mark the length of the cotton field. Big Ma was Papa's mother, and like him, she was tall and strongly built, while her clear, smooth skin was the color of a pecan shell. "Ah, Big Ma, I ain't gonna fall," I scoffed, and then climbed into the next strong spike and reached for a fibrous puff at the top of a tall cotton stalk. "You sure better not fall, girl," grumbled Big Ma. "Sometime I wish we had more low cotton like down round Vicksburg. I don't like y'all children climbing them things." She looked around, her hand on her hip, while Christopher John and Little Man farther down the field balanced skillfully on lower spikes of their own poles, plucking the last of the cotton. But Stacy, too heavy now to climb the poles, was forced to remain on the ground. And Big Ma eyed us all again. Then, with the burlap bag slung across her right shoulder and dangling at the left side of her waist, she moved down the road toward Mama. "Mary child, I think with what we picked today, we ought to have ourselves another bell." Well, Mama was stooped over a low cotton branch, and she stuffed one last puff into her bag and straightened. She was tawny colored, thin and sinewy, with delicate features and a strong-jawed face. and though almost as tall as Big Ma, she seemed somewhat dwarfed beside her. "I expect you're right, Mama," she said. "Come Monday, we'd better haul it up to the Granger place and have it ginned. Then we can—" "Cassie, what's the matter?" Well, I didn't answer Mama. I'd moved to the very top of my pole and could now see above the field to the road where two figures, one much taller than the other, were walking briskly. As the men rounded a curve in the road, they became more distinct. There was, in the easy, fluid gait of the shorter man, a familiarity that made me gasp. I squinted, shadowing my eyes from the sun, and then slipped like lightning down the pole. "Cassie, it's Papa!" "David?" Mama questioned unbelievingly as Christopher John and Little Man descended eagerly and dashed after Stacy and me toward the barbed wire fence. "Don't you all go through that fence!" Big Ma called after us, but we pretended not to hear. We held the second and third rows of the prickly wire wide for each other to climb through. Then all four of us sped down the road toward Papa. When Papa saw us, he began running swiftly, easily like the wind. Little Man, the first to reach him, was swept lightly upward in Papa's strong hands as Christopher John and Stacy and I crowded around. "Papa, what are you doing home?" asked Little Man. Well, putting Little Man down, Papa said, "Just had to come home and see about my babies." And he hugged and kissed each of us and then stood back. "Just look at y'all," he said proudly. "Ain't y'all something? Can't hardly call y'all babies no more." And he turned. "Mr. Morrison, what do you think about these children of mine?" In our excitement, we had taken no notice of the other man standing quietly at the side of the road. But now, gazing upward at the most formidable-looking being we had ever encountered, we huddled closer to Papa. The man was a human tree in height, towering high above Papa's 6'2". The long trunk of his massive body bulged with muscles, and his skin of the deepest ebony was partially scarred upon his feet and necks as if by fire. Deep lifelines were cut into his face, and his hair was splotched with gray, but his eyes were clear and penetrating. I glanced at the boys, and it was obvious to me that they were wondering the same thing as I. Where had such a being come from? "Well, children," said Papa, "meet Mr. L.T. Morrison." Each of us whispered a faint hello to the giant, and then the six of us started up the road toward home. And before we reached the house, Mama and Big Ma met us. When Papa saw Mama, his square, high cheekbone face opened to a wide smile, and lifting Mama with spirited gusto, he swung her around twice before setting her down and kissing her. "David, is something the matter?" she asked. Papa laughed. "Something gonna be wrong, woman, for me to come see about you?" "You got my letter?" He nodded, and then hugged and kissed Big Ma before introducing them both to Mr. Morrison. When we reached the house, we climbed the long, sloping lawn to the porch and went into Mama and Papa's room, which also served as a living area. My Mama offered Mr. Morrison Grandpa Logan's chair, a cushioned oak rocker skillfully crafted by Grandpa himself. But Mr. Morrison did not sit down immediately. Instead, he stood gazing at the room. It was a warm, comfortable room of doors and wood and pictures. From it, a person could reach the front or the side porch, the kitchen, and the two other bedrooms. Its walls were made of smooth oak, and on them hung gigantic photographs of Grandpa and Big Mama, Papa and Uncle Hammer when they were boys, and Papa's two eldest brothers who were now dead, and pictures of Mama's family. The furniture, a mixture of Logan-crafted walnut and oak, included a walnut bed whose ornate headboard rose halfway up the wall toward the high ceiling. A grand, I never can say this right, I'm going to say a grand armoire is what I'm going to call it, with a floor-length mirror, a large roll-top desk which had once been Grandpa's but now belonged to Mama, and the 4 oak chairs, 2 of them rockers, which Grandpa had made for Big Ma as a wedding present. Mr. Morrison nodded when he had taken it all in, as if he approved, and then sat across from Papa in front of the unlit fireplace, while the boys and I pulled up straight back chairs near Papa, as Big Ma asked, "How long you gonna be home, son?" And Papa looked across at her. "Till Sunday evening," he said quietly. "Sunday?" Mama exclaimed. "Why, today's already Saturday." "I know, baby," Papa said, taking her hand, "but I gotta get that night train out of Vicksburg so I can get back to work by Monday morning." Well, Christopher John, little man, and I groaned loudly, and Papa turned to us. "Papa, can't you stay no longer than that? Last time you come home, you stayed a week," I said. And Papa gently pulled one of my pigtails. "Sorry, Cassie girl, but I stay any longer, I might lose my job." "But Papa..." "Listen, all of y'all," he said, looking from me to the boys to Mama and Big Mom. "I come home special so I could bring Mr. Morrison. He gonna stay with us a while." Well, if Mama and Big Ma were surprised by Papa's words, they did not show it. But the boys and I looked with wide eyes at each other and then at the giant. "Now, Mr. Morrison lost his job on the railroad a while back," Papa continued, "and he ain't been able to find anything else. When I asked him if he wanted to come work here as a hired hand, he said he would. I told him we couldn't afford much, food and shelter, and a few dollars in cash when I come home in the winter." Well, Mama turned to Mr. Morrison and studied him for a moment and said, "Welcome to our house, Mr. Morrison." "Ms. Logan," said Mr. Morrison in a deep, quiet voice like the roll of low thunder, "I think you ought to know I got fired off my job. Got in a fight with some men, beat 'em up pretty bad." And Mama stared into Mr. Morrison's deep eyes. "Whose fault was it?" Mr. Morrison stared back. "I'd say theirs." "Did the other men get fired?" "No, ma'am," answered Mr. Morrison. "They was white." And Mama nodded and stood. "Well, thank you for telling me, Mr. Morrison. You're lucky no worse happened, and we're glad to have you here, especially now." Then she turned and went to the kitchen with Big Ma to prepare supper, leaving the boys and me to wonder about her last words. "Stacy, what do you think?" I asked as we milked the cows in the evening. "How come Papa come home and brung Mr. Morrison?" And Stacy shrugged. "Like he said, I guess." And I thought on that a moment. "Papa ain't never brung nobody here before." And Stacy did not reply. "You think? Stacy, you think it's 'cause of them burnings TJ was talking about?" "Burnings?" piped little man, who had interrupted his feeding of the chickens to visit with Lady, our golden mare. "What's burnings got to do with anything? That happened way over by Smellins Creek," said Stacy, slowly ignoring little man. "Papa got no need to think." And his voice trailed off and he stopped milking. "Think what?" I asked. "Nothing," he muttered, turning back to the cow. "Don't worry about it." Well, I glared at him. "I ain't worrying. I just want to know, that's all. And I bet you anything Mr. Morton come here to do more'n work. I sure wish I knew for sure." Stacy made no reply, but Christopher John, his pudgy hands filled with dried corn for the chicken and his lower lip a-quivering, said, "I know what I wish. I wish Papa didn't have to go away no more. I wish he could just stay and stay and stay." Now, if we think about Mr. and Mrs. Logan, that's Cassie's mom and dad, we would say that they're generous, okay? I'm able to identify an aspect of Mr. and Mrs. Logan as generous. And now I have to say, what's my evidence to support that? Am I going to support it with thoughts, words, or actions? I would support that they're generous by their actions. their actions show that by their allowing Mr. Morrison to come and stay with them at their own home since he's not been able to find any other work or employment. Now, granted, Papa said that come Christmas, he might have a little bit of money to pay him, but for the most part, they're just saying, you know what, come and stay with us. And that's generous. Now, Papa knows Mr. Morrison. Mama doesn't know this man from Adam, and so she's just really trusting in Papa to not bring in some crazy person. But she also has to have a generous heart because she's going on with Papa has to say about this. So their actions speak for them, and which is really important. People can say anything, you know, but what do they do? You know, how do they carry themselves? What are the actions that they put with those words? Okay, so that's really important when you're trying to make up your mind about someone. What do their actions show you? Okay, that's really important. This is a Friday, and so at regular school on Fridays, guys, it's not unusual for our day to be somewhat shortened, whether it's because of concession day or whether it's because of a special assembly. So we're going to say that today is a special assembly day. And that's all the work that we're going to do today. So we're going to stop right here. We've gone over our questions. We've done teacher read. And I will see you guys on Monday. All right. Enjoy the weekend. Bye.